It is the year 1314. In Paris, near the Cathedral of Notre Dame, a man named Jacques de Molay is burned at the stake. He is the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, a once powerful religious and military order. As the flames rise, witnesses claim he declares his innocence and calls upon God to judge his persecutors, the King of France and the Pope. Within a year, both are dead. This event marks the end of the Templars, but also the beginning of centuries of speculation. Rumors spread about curses, hidden treasures, and secret knowledge. The order disappears, yet its memory becomes larger than life. Who were the Knights Templar? How did a small group of monks become one of the most influential organizations in medieval Europe? And why did they fall so suddenly, leaving behind a legacy filled with mystery? To understand the myths, we must begin with the facts. The Knights Templar were founded around the year 1119, during the aftermath of the First Crusade. Christian armies had captured Jerusalem 20 years earlier, and thousands of European pilgrims began traveling to the Holy Land. The journey was dangerous. Bandits and raiders often attacked travelers on the road between the coast and Jerusalem. A French knight named Hugues du Payens and 8 companions decided to protect those pilgrims. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience and promised to defend travelers in the name of Christ. Their group was small, poor, and humble at first. They received the support of King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, who allowed them to live in part of his royal palace on the Temple Mount. The building stood on the site believed to be the remains of the Temple of Solomon. Because of that, the knights became known as the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. In Latin, Pauperes Commilitones Christi Templica Salomonici. The name Templar came from this connection to the temple. Their symbol was a red cross on a white mantle. The white represented purity. The red represented the willingness to die for their faith. They followed a strict code of conduct inspired by monastic rules. They prayed daily, avoided personal wealth, and lived in disciplined communities. But unlike ordinary monks, they were trained soldiers. Their mission combined spiritual devotion with military duty. At first, the Templars had little influence. They relied on donations and the protection of the church. But in 1129, at the Council of Troy, they gained official recognition from the Pope. This gave them legitimacy, and they began to attract support from nobles across Europe. Wealthy families donated land, money, and horses. Young men joined the order to serve God and gain honor. Within a few decades, the Templars grew from a small band of knights into a major institution. They built castles and fortresses throughout the Holy Land and across Europe. They developed an efficient network of commanderies, which acted as both military bases and economic centers. Because of their honesty and organization, people began to trust them with valuables and money. Pilgrims could deposit funds in Europe and withdraw them safely in the Holy Land. This was an early form of banking, and the Templars became known not only as warriors, but also as reliable financial administrators. Their independence was unusual for the time. The Templars answered directly to the Pope, not to any king or bishop. They had their own laws, property, and military forces. Over time, they became one of the most powerful institutions in medieval Europe. Their secrecy also contributed to their reputation. The Templars held private ceremonies for initiation, and few outside the order knew exactly what occurred during them. Their combination of military strength, wealth, and mystery inspired both admiration and fear. By the middle of the 13th century, the Knights Templar were at the height of their influence. They controlled land from England to the Holy Land, maintained a fleet of ships, and served as bankers to kings and nobles. Yet within less than a century, they would be accused of heresy, tortured, and destroyed. The question remains, how did such a powerful and respected order fall so completely? To answer that, we must follow their journey from the deserts of Jerusalem to the courts of Europe, where politics, ambition, and suspicion sealed their fate. The early decades of the 12th century were a time of transition for the Christian world. The First Crusade had established new kingdoms in the Middle East, but these territories were fragile. They relied on constant military support and a steady flow of pilgrims and supplies from Europe. The Templars emerged during this uncertain period. Their mission was clear and practical: to protect pilgrims and defend Christian strongholds in the Holy Land. Yet, within a few decades, their role expanded far beyond what anyone could have imagined. After their official recognition by the Catholic Church in 1129, the Templars began to attract widespread support. Their rule was endorsed by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most influential religious figures of the age. Bernard wrote a treatise titled In Praise of the New Knighthood, describing the Templars as an ideal combination of monk and warrior, men who fought not for personal glory, but for the defense of faith. This endorsement gave the order immense moral authority. In a society deeply shaped by religion, it presented the Templars as pure defenders of Christendom, nobles who wished to serve God, but also valued military honor, found in the order a perfect outlet. The Templars' organization reflected both discipline and efficiency. At the top stood the Grand Master, elected for life by the leading members of the order. Beneath him were various ranks: commanders, knights, sergeants, and chaplains. The order was divided into provinces, each managed by a preceptor who oversaw local properties and finances. The Templars followed a detailed rule of conduct, inspired by monastic orders like the Cistercians. They wore simple clothing, avoided luxury, and ate together in silence. They prayed several times a day, attended Mass daily, and confessed regularly. They could not gamble, swear, or hunt for sport. Their lives were regulated by obedience and routine, but unlike monks, they were also professional soldiers. The order maintained a permanent army trained in cavalry warfare. The Templars became known for their discipline and courage on the battlefield. Their heavy cavalry charges were decisive in many engagements during the Crusades. Chronicles from the time describe them as fearless and steadfast, often holding their positions even when outnumbered. Templar castles were strategically placed across the Holy Land. These fortresses served as defensive strongholds, supply centers, and administrative hubs. Some of the most famous included the castles of Safed, Tortosa, and the impressive fortress of Atlet on the coast. Their architecture combined European and Middle Eastern styles, emphasizing strength, symmetry, and endurance. Outside the Holy Land, the Templars built networks of commanderies throughout Europe. These estates supported the military operations abroad by providing food, horses, weapons, and money. They also served as centers of agricultural and economic activity. The order managed its resources with remarkable skill, developing efficient accounting systems and maintaining precise records. By the middle of the 12th century, the Templars had become a truly international institution. Their members came from across Europe: France, England, Spain, Italy, and the German states. Communication between these regions was constant. Messengers carried letters, funds, and orders across the Mediterranean and beyond. Their growing wealth and reputation made them trusted agents in financial matters. Kings, nobles, and even the church began to use Templar houses as secure places to store valuables or transfer money. Pilgrims could deposit funds in a Templar commandery in Europe and receive a document that allowed them to withdraw an equivalent sum in Jerusalem. This system greatly reduced the risk of theft during travel and represented one of the earliest forms of international banking. In some ways, the Templars became the financial backbone of the Crusader states. They collected rents, managed estates, and even lent money to monarchs. By the late 12th century, they were deeply involved in both military and economic affairs across Europe and the Middle East. However, the Templars' success was not only built on money or power, their reputation for discipline and integrity gave them a unique position in medieval society. They were considered above corruption, bound by vows, and dedicated to divine service. Their independence from secular authority allowed them to operate across borders without interference. The Templars also developed a distinct identity. Their white mantle with a red cross became a symbol of purity and sacrifice. The cross was not merely decoration, but a sign of their willingness to die in battle for the faith. Every knight carried this symbolism into combat, believing that death in service of God guaranteed eternal salvation. Their daily life balanced the spiritual and the martial. A typical Templar day included prayer, manual labor, and military training. Meals were simple, often consisting of bread, vegetables, and wine. Meat was eaten only on certain days. Silence was observed during meals, broken only by readings from religious texts. The rule emphasized humility, unity, and service above all. In the field, Templar discipline was unmatched. They rode in tightly organized formations, and each knight was supported by several squires and sergeants. The order's banner, called the Buson Taunt, displayed black and white colors, black for the enemies they fought, white for the purity of their cause. To flee from battle was considered a grave sin, unless the banner itself had fallen. Over time, the Templars established a network of influence that extended from the Crusader castles of the East to the royal courts of the West. They were closely involved in the politics of the Crusades, sometimes negotiating with Muslim rulers and other Christian orders. Despite the frequent violence of the age, the Templars were known to respect truces and diplomatic agreements when ordered to do so by their superiors. Their rise coincided with the broader expansion of Christendom. The Crusades in Spain, the Baltic region, and the Holy Land all benefited from the Templars' organization and resources. The order became a model for other military orders, such as the Knights Hospitaller and the Teutonic Knights, which adopted similar structures and rules. By the late 12th century, the Templars had achieved almost mythic status. They were seen as the ultimate defenders of faith, combining piety with military might. Yet their growing wealth and independence also began to attract envy and suspicion. Kings and nobles borrowed money from them, but few could repay their debts. Their privileges, exemption from taxes, their own courts, and papal protection placed them outside normal feudal control. At the same time, the situation in the Holy Land began to deteriorate. The Crusader states were constantly under pressure from Muslim forces. The fall of Jerusalem in 1187 to Saladin marked a turning point. The Templars fought bravely in the defense of the remaining Christian territories, but their position was weakening. Despite these challenges, the order continued to expand in Europe. Its network of estates became an essential part of medieval infrastructure. Many villages and towns grew around Templar commanderies. They managed farms, vineyards, and mills, and introduced efficient methods of production. The order's financial administration was so advanced that some historians consider it an early form of corporate organization. In their correspondence, Templars referred to themselves as the Brothers of the Temple. They saw their mission as both spiritual and practical, to defend Christendom, protect the weak, and maintain the pilgrimage routes to the Holy Land. For nearly 2 centuries, they fulfilled that mission with remarkable effectiveness. However, the combination of power, secrecy, and wealth would eventually make them vulnerable. The Templars' independence from royal authority, once a source of strength, became a threat in the eyes of ambitious rulers. Their reputation for secrecy fueled rumors of hidden doctrines and forbidden rituals. By the beginning of the 14th century, the Crusader states had fallen, and the Templars no longer had a clear military purpose. Their influence in Europe remained, but their original mission was fading. They had become powerful bankers, landowners, and administrators, respected but no longer essential. In this environment, envy and distrust grew. When economic crises struck and kings found themselves deeply in debt, the Templars became convenient targets. Their downfall would come not from enemies in battle, but from political intrigue and the shifting balance of power in medieval Europe. Before we explore their destruction, it is important to understand the structure that made them both admired and feared. The Templars' success was based on discipline, faith, and organization, qualities that allowed them to survive for nearly 2 centuries. Yet those same qualities would later be used against them, reinterpreted as evidence of arrogance, secrecy, and heresy. The rise of the Knights Templar was one of the most remarkable stories of the Middle Ages, the transformation of a small group of poor knights into an international order with immense influence. Their fall, when it came, would be equally dramatic, and it would leave behind questions that have never been fully answered. By the middle of the 12th century, the Knights Templar had become more than a military order. They were an international institution whose reach extended across continents. Their influence was no longer limited to the battlefields of the Holy Land, but spread throughout the economic, political, and spiritual life of medieval Europe. The order's strength rested on 3 pillars: faith, organization, and financial power. Together, these created a structure that was both admired and feared. The Templars owned vast lands across Christendom. In France, England, Spain, and Portugal, they held farms, vineyards, mills, and entire villages. Each estate, known as a commandery, functioned as part of a larger network. The profits from these lands funded the order's military operations in the East. The system was efficient and disciplined, allowing resources to flow quickly where they were needed most. Templar commanderies were self-sufficient communities. They employed local laborers, craftsmen, and servants. The brothers who managed them were trained administrators as well as soldiers. Detailed records were kept of harvests, rents, and expenses. In many regions, Templar estates became centers of agricultural innovation and stability. The order's financial operations gradually evolved beyond simple management of its own wealth. Because of its reputation for honesty and its direct connection to the church, the Templars became trusted custodians of money and valuables for others. Kings, nobles, and bishops deposited funds with them for safekeeping. Pilgrims used their network to transfer money securely between Europe and the Holy Land. This service worked much like a modern banking system. A pilgrim could deposit gold in a Templar house in Paris and receive a written note, often encoded. Upon arrival in Jerusalem, he could present this note at another Templar commandery and receive the equivalent value in local currency. This innovation reduced the risk of theft on the dangerous journey and made the Templars indispensable to travelers. Over time, their financial expertise grew. They issued loans, managed estates for absentee lords, and even financed military campaigns. Monarchs frequently turned to them for credit, especially when preparing for war. In England, the Templars handled royal revenue and stored the crown's treasure in their London headquarters, known as the Temple. In France, they performed similar functions for the monarchy and major nobles. Their influence in financial matters was immense, but it also created tension. Rulers often became indebted to the Templars, and repayment was difficult. The order's exemption from taxes and its direct answerability to the Pope made it untouchable by ordinary legal means. To some kings, this independence appeared as arrogance. Despite their wealth, the Templars themselves lived under a rule that emphasized simplicity. Individual knights did not own personal property. Their equipment, clothing, and horses belonged to the order. Meals were communal, and luxuries were forbidden. Their resources served the collective mission to defend Christendom and maintain the holy sites. Yet, their economic system made them powerful. By the late 13th century, the Templars' financial network spanned nearly every major European city. They could move funds across borders faster than any secular institution. Their combination of military, religious, and economic functions was unique in history. Their political influence followed naturally from their wealth. Popes and kings sought their advice. They were often called upon as neutral mediators in disputes between rulers. In the Crusader states, their voice carried great weight. The Grand Master of the Order was sometimes treated as an equal by kings. This independence, however, also isolated them. The Templars owed allegiance to no secular ruler. Their loyalty was to their own hierarchy, and ultimately to the Pope. They paid no taxes, obeyed no local laws, and could travel freely across borders. In an age of growing royal authority, such privileges bred resentment. The order's internal structure reinforced this sense of separation. Entry into the Templars required a formal ceremony conducted in secrecy. Candidates took solemn vows before a small circle of senior members. They swore obedience, chastity, and poverty, and pledged to defend the faith until death. Outsiders were not permitted to witness these rituals. Because few people ever saw what happened inside Templar meetings, speculation grew. Their emphasis on secrecy was practical, intended to preserve unity and discipline, but to outsiders it appeared suspicious. Rumors spread that they engaged in mysterious practices or possessed hidden knowledge. Contemporary documents suggest that the initiation included symbolic gestures of humility and loyalty, such as kneeling or promises to obey. However, later accusations would twist these into claims of heresy and blasphemy. The combination of silence, secrecy, and power made the Templars an easy target for myth-making. Their spiritual life was centered on devotion and prayer. Chaplains within the order conducted mass and administered sacraments. The Templars were known for strict observance of religious duties, though their military responsibilities often forced them into contact with non-Christian cultures. In the Holy Land, they interacted with Muslims, Jews, and Eastern Christians. This exposure to different beliefs sometimes fueled the legend that they had absorbed secret teachings. The Templars' symbol, the red cross on a white mantle, became one of the most recognized emblems in Europe. It appeared on banners, shields, and buildings, signifying purity and sacrifice. Their Latin motto, non nobis domi, non nobis, sed nomini tuo da gloriam. Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but to your name give glory, expressed their ideal of humility. Nevertheless, their growing reputation as both monks and warriors, as soldiers and bankers, created an image that ordinary people could not easily understand. To many, they seemed to live outside the normal world, guided by rules and purposes known only to themselves. Stories began to circulate that the Templars possessed secret relics or hidden treasures discovered during their time in Jerusalem. Some claimed they had excavated beneath the Temple Mount and found sacred artifacts, perhaps even the Holy Grail or the Ark of the Covenant. These claims were never substantiated, but they reflected the deep fascination that the order inspired. The association with the Temple of Solomon also carried symbolic power. In the medieval imagination, the temple represented divine wisdom and the center of the world. The idea that the Templars had uncovered ancient knowledge there fit easily into the mystical worldview of the time. Internally, the order was pragmatic rather than mystical. Their records show an emphasis on discipline, logistics, and faith. Yet the gap between their practical reality and their public image grew wider over time. While the Templars saw themselves as servants of God and guardians of pilgrims, others began to see them as a secretive elite controlling vast resources and hidden information. This perception was intensified by the decline of the Crusades. As the Christian presence in the Holy Land weakened, the Templars' military purpose became less clear. Their castles fell one by one, and by 1291, With the fall of Acre, the last major Crusader stronghold, their mission in the east effectively ended. After that, the order focused on defending the remaining Christian territories around the Mediterranean, especially Cyprus. But their immense infrastructure in Europe remained intact. They continued to collect income from their estates, maintain their fleet, and serve as financial intermediaries. To the public, it seemed that the Templars had lost their holy purpose but kept their power. In France, their wealth and influence were particularly visible. The Templar headquarters in Paris stood near the royal palace and housed not only their archives, but also a large treasury. It was said that kings deposited their money there for safekeeping. The Temple of Paris became a symbol of both security and suspicion. By the early 14th century, their independence and resources drew the attention of King Philip IV of France. He was heavily indebted to the order and increasingly hostile to institutions beyond his control. The Templars' secretive nature made them vulnerable to accusations. What had once been admired as discipline and loyalty now appeared as arrogance and conspiracy. The transformation of their image from holy knights to alleged heretics began slowly, fueled by envy, fear, and misunderstanding. Their secrecy, once a source of strength, would soon become the reason for their destruction. The next chapter in their story would not unfold on the battlefield, but in royal courts and inquisitorial chambers. The fall of the Knights Templar would be swift, brutal, and final. By the beginning of the 14th century, the Knights Templar had existed for nearly 200 years. They were respected, wealthy, and influential, yet increasingly isolated from the changing world around them. The Crusades were over. The Christian kingdoms in the Holy Land had fallen. The order's military purpose was no longer clear. In Europe, royal power was growing stronger. Kings sought control over institutions that had once operated independently of their authority. The Templars, with their vast wealth and papal privileges, were one of the few remaining organizations that stood outside royal influence. This independence would seal their fate. At the center of their downfall was King Philip IV of France, also known as Philip the Fair. He was intelligent, ambitious, and ruthless in financial matters. His wars with England and Flanders had left France deeply in debt. Much of that debt was owed to the Templars, who had served as royal bankers and financial administrators for many years. Philip had a history of conflict with the Church. He had previously clashed with Pope Boniface VIII over issues of taxation and authority. After the Pope's death, Philip played a key role in moving the papal court to Avignon, where it would remain for decades under French influence. By 1307, Philip controlled not only his own kingdom, but also much of the papal institution. The Templars, though loyal to the papacy, represented a problem. Their wealth was vast, their independence absolute, and their secrecy suspicious. To a ruler burdened by debt and hungry for control, the order appeared both dangerous and tempting. In early 1307, rumors began to circulate in France that the Templars practiced heretical and blasphemous rites. It is unclear where these accusations originated, but they may have been encouraged by Philip's agents. The charges included denial of Christ, spitting on the cross, and worship of a mysterious idol called Baphomet. Such claims, while shocking, fit well into the atmosphere of fear and superstition that surrounded the order's secrecy. On Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, the king acted. In a coordinated operation across France, royal officials arrested hundreds of Templars simultaneously. The suddenness of the action ensured that there would be no resistance. Their properties were seized, their records confiscated, and their leaders imprisoned. The arrests marked the beginning of one of the most notorious inquisitions in medieval history. Under pressure from the king, the Templars were subjected to interrogation and torture. Many, facing pain and fear, confessed to the charges brought against them. These confessions varied widely and were often contradictory, but they provided the appearance of guilt that Philip needed. Among those arrested was the Grand Master Jacques de Molay. He had served the order for decades and was respected for his integrity. At first, he confessed under duress, admitting to acts of heresy. Later, he retracted his confession, insisting on the order's innocence. His shifting statements would become central to the controversy that followed. Pope Clement V, who resided in Avignon under Philip's influence, was initially hesitant to act against the Templars. The order was under papal authority, not royal, but Philip's pressure was relentless. The confessions extracted under torture were presented as proof of widespread corruption. Public opinion began to turn. In 1308, the Pope ordered his own investigation. Across Europe, the Templars were questioned by church authorities. In most regions, the results were inconclusive. Many brothers denied all charges and affirmed their faith. In England, Germany, and the Iberian Peninsula, local inquiries found little evidence of heresy. But in France, where the king controlled the process, the outcome was predetermined. Over the next several years, the trials continued. The charges against the Templars included idolatry, blasphemy, homosexuality, and corruption. These accusations reflected common fears of the time, rather than verifiable facts. There was no consistent evidence of organized heresy. Nonetheless, the combination of torture, propaganda, and royal power made resistance impossible. By 1312, Philip's campaign had achieved its goal. At the Council of Vienne, Pope Clement V formally dissolved the Order of the Temple. The official reason was that the scandal had damaged the Church's reputation, though the Pope stopped short of declaring the Templars guilty of heresy. Their remaining assets were transferred to the Knights Hospitaller, another military order, but much of the wealth in France quietly remained under royal control. Jacques de Molay and several other leaders were kept in prison for years. In 1314, they were brought before a final tribunal in Paris to hear their sentences. The expectation was that they would confirm their earlier confessions and accept life imprisonment. Instead, de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny, another high-ranking Templar, stood before the crowd and proclaimed their innocence. They declared that the order had always been faithful to Christ and that their confessions had been forced. The sudden reversal shocked the authorities. King Philip immediately ordered their execution. That same day, Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny were burned at the stake on an island in the River Seine, within sight of Notre Dame Cathedral. According to later accounts, de Molay maintained his composure as the flames rose. He prayed aloud and called upon God to judge the truth. Some chroniclers claimed he invoked a curse, summoning the king and the pope to appear before God within a year. Whether this statement was historical or legend, it gained enormous symbolic power. Within a year, both Philip IV and Pope Clement V were dead. The destruction of the Templars marked a turning point in medieval history. It demonstrated how royal power could dominate even the church, and how propaganda could destroy an institution once considered sacred. The charges of heresy were never conclusively proven, and many contemporaries believed the order had been a victim of greed and politics. After the dissolution, former Templars disappeared into other religious communities or returned to secular life. Some joined the Hospitallers, others became farmers, craftsmen, or soldiers under different banners. In some regions, local rulers refused to carry out the papal decree and allowed the Templars to live in peace. In Portugal, the order was reconstituted under a new name, the Order of Christ, with papal approval. This organization preserved much of the Templar structure and traditions, and centuries later, it would play a role in the Portuguese Age of Exploration. In the public imagination, however, the Templars did not vanish. Their abrupt destruction, the mystery of their rituals, and the rumors of lost treasure gave birth to centuries of speculation. The idea that they possessed secret knowledge or sacred relics became a recurring theme in legend and literature. Their fall also gave rise to one of the most enduring myths of all, the supposed Templar curse. The story of Jacques de Molay's final words, calling for divine justice, became a symbol of the order's innocence and the corruption of its enemies. For many, the deaths of Philip and Clement seemed like cosmic retribution. Modern historians see the suppression of the Templars as a product of political calculation rather than divine fate. The order's destruction allowed the French crown to eliminate its debts and remove a powerful independent institution. The church, weakened and divided, offered little resistance. The tragedy of the Templars lay in their transformation from a force of faith and discipline into victims of fear and power. Their legacy, however, would outlast their enemies. Long after their ashes cooled on the banks of the Seine, the mysteries of the Knights Templar continued to grow. Stories of hidden treasure, secret doctrines, and unseen survival. These legends would ensure that although the order was gone, its name would never be forgotten. The destruction of the Knights Templar in the early 14th century ended their existence as an official order, but it did not end their story. In many ways, their true afterlife began only after their fall. What followed was the transformation of the Templars from a historical institution into a powerful symbol of mystery, secrecy, and hidden knowledge. For centuries, writers, chroniclers, and storytellers have tried to fill the silence left by their disappearance, because the real reasons for their arrest and execution were political and complex. People sought simpler explanations, ones involving secret treasures, forbidden rituals, and ancient wisdom. These stories grew over time, blending fragments of truth with imagination. Among the many legends that emerged, a few became central to the myth of the Templars. One of the most enduring stories concerns the so-called Templar treasure. When King Philip ordered the arrests in 1307, his men seized the order's property in France, but according to several contemporary accounts, they found no great store of gold or silver. The Templars had been wealthy, yet their finances were spread across Europe, recorded in ledgers and accounts rather than kept as physical hoards. The absence of treasure immediately fueled rumors that it had been moved or hidden in advance. Some claimed that a group of Templars in Paris, forewarned of the arrests, loaded wagons or ships with golden relics and fled the city under cover of darkness. Their trail disappeared at the port of La Rochelle, where the Templars maintained a fleet. From there, the legends diverge. One version claims the treasure was shipped to Scotland, where sympathetic nobles sheltered the surviving Templars. Another suggests it was taken across the Atlantic Ocean, centuries before Columbus, and hidden in the New World. A more modest interpretation holds that the treasure was not gold at all, but sacred relics or secret documents, perhaps something discovered in Jerusalem during the Order's early years on the Temple Mount. Modern historians find no evidence of a surviving Templar fleet or hidden treasure. The Order's accounts, where preserved, show that most assets were in land and debt rather than precious metal. Yet the image of a vanished fortune remains powerful. It symbolizes the idea that the Templars possessed something too important or dangerous to fall into royal hands, and that it may still be hidden somewhere, waiting to be found. Closely connected to the legend of the treasure is the claim that the Templars guarded the Holy Grail. This idea did not exist in medieval records of the Order, but emerged centuries later, especially during the Romantic and occult revivals of the 18th and 19th centuries. The Grail, in Christian legend, is the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper and said to have caught his blood at the crucifixion. Medieval romances described it as a mysterious object of divine power, often guarded by noble knights in remote castles. Writers such as Wolfram von Eschenbach in the 12th century associated the Grail with secret lineages and hidden wisdom. Because the Templars were linked to both the Temple of Solomon and to the Crusades, later authors began to connect them to the Grail myth. In these stories, the Order was said to have discovered the Grail in Jerusalem and brought it to Europe for safekeeping. Some versions claimed the Grail was a physical relic, others interpreted it symbolically as spiritual enlightenment or forbidden knowledge. No historical document mentions any Templar connection to the Grail. Their official writings and rules make no reference to relics or sacred artifacts beyond the cross and the scriptures. However, the association endures because it fits the pattern of the Templar legend, an organization shrouded in secrecy, linked to sacred places, and destroyed before it could reveal what it knew. Another of the central accusations during the Templar trials was the worship of a mysterious idol called Baphomet. Under torture, some brothers admitted to having seen or heard of such an object, though their descriptions differed widely. Some said it was a severed head, others a human skull, a metal statue, or an image with multiple faces. The name Baphomet appears to be a corruption of Mahomet, the medieval European term for Mohammed, reflecting the Crusaders' exposure to Islam. It is possible that the accusation was based on misunderstanding or deliberate distortion. The Templars' enemies might have used the word as a convenient symbol of heresy, implying that the order had adopted non-Christian practices. In later centuries, especially during the 19th century, the image of Baphomet evolved into a complex occult symbol. Writers such as Eliphas Levi depicted it as a winged, goat-headed figure, representing the balance of opposites, light and dark, male and female, good and evil. This modern image, though striking, has no connection to the historical Templars. It emerged from 19th century esoteric traditions, long after the order's destruction. Historical analysis suggests that the idol may have been an invention of the Inquisitors, or a distorted reference to relics the Templars kept, such as saintly skulls or devotional statues. There is no evidence that the Templars practiced idolatry or occultism. Nevertheless, the name Baphomet became permanently linked with them in popular imagination, contributing to their reputation as keepers of hidden mysteries. After the suppression of the Templars, rumors spread that the order had not truly vanished. Stories emerged of secret gatherings, hidden chapters, and continuation under new names. In Scotland, which was outside direct papal control during the trials, local tradition holds that Templars found refuge among sympathetic lords. According to later legends, they aided Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, helping to secure Scotland's independence. There is no contemporary evidence for this claim, but it became a key part of Scottish national mythology. Another version suggests that the Templars survived in Portugal under a different name. This is partly true. The Portuguese king successfully petitioned the Pope to transfer the order's property to a new organization, the Order of Christ, established in 1319. Many former Templars joined it, and it preserved much of the old structure. Centuries later, members of the Order of Christ, including Prince Henry the Navigator, played an important role in the Age of Exploration, carrying Templar symbolism on their sails. The most famous survival legend connects the Templars to Freemasonry. This theory emerged in the 18th century when Masonic lodges began to draw on medieval imagery and ritual. Some Masonic writers claimed their order descended from the Templars, preserving their secret wisdom through the centuries. Although this claim is symbolic rather than historical, it reflects how the Templar myth was absorbed into modern traditions of secrecy and enlightenment. Historically, there is no proven link between the medieval Templars and modern Freemasonry. The two share certain symbols, such as the Temple of Solomon, but these are derived from biblical sources, common to many Christian and Masonic traditions. The connection between them is imaginative, not genealogical. The survival of these legends shows how deeply the Templars captured the European imagination. They represented many things at once: faith, courage, secrecy, and tragedy. Their fall seemed unjust, and injustice often gives rise to myth. Over the centuries, the Templars became a mirror for the hopes and fears of different eras. To some, they were martyrs of faith, to others, keepers of hidden wisdom. In modern culture, they appear as guardians of lost relics, founders of secret societies, or protectors of ancient truths. Writers from the Renaissance to the present day have used their story to explore themes of power and mystery. From early chronicles to contemporary novels and films, the Templars have remained symbols of the hidden and the sacred. Behind the myths, the historical reality is simpler, but no less remarkable. The Templars were disciplined soldiers, skilled administrators, and devout Christians who became victims of political manipulation. Their real secrets were their efficiency, unity, and loyalty to their cause, qualities that made them both successful and feared. Yet the legends endure because they speak to something deeper, the human fascination with what is lost, forbidden, and unknown. The Templars disappeared suddenly, leaving behind ruins, documents, and unanswered questions. In that silence, imagination took root. It filled the gaps with stories of treasure, revelation, and immortality. Even today, 7 centuries after their fall, the name Templar carries an aura of mystery. It evokes both faith and conspiracy, light and shadow, reality and myth. The line between what we know and what we dream about them remains as blurred as ever. By the time the legends of the Knights Templar began to spread across Europe, centuries had already passed since their destruction. Stories of hidden treasures, secret knowledge, and survival under new names had become deeply rooted in popular imagination. Yet when historians and archaeologists began to examine the evidence, a much clearer and simpler picture emerged. The Templars were not guardians of mystical relics or secret doctrines. They were a disciplined military and religious order that rose to prominence through organization, faith, and practical skill. Their history is well documented in surviving charters, papal decrees, and financial records. When these sources are studied carefully, they reveal a story of human ambition, faith, and power, not of magic or mystery. Much of the confusion surrounding the Templars comes from the unusual combination of their roles. They were monks who also fought as soldiers, and over time they became bankers, diplomats, and landlords. In medieval Europe, such a mixture of functions was rare. To ordinary people, it appeared unnatural, even suspicious. The secrecy of their internal rules added to that sense of mystery. Yet their secrecy was administrative and devotional, not occult. Like most religious orders, the Templars kept their rituals private and protected their internal affairs from outside interference. Archaeological findings support the image of an order devoted to discipline and practicality. Excavations of Templar commanderies and fortresses show no traces of hidden chambers or unusual symbols. Their buildings were designed for defense and efficiency: thick walls, simple chapels, and functional living quarters. Their castles in the Holy Land, such as those at Atlit and Saft, were masterpieces of military engineering, built to withstand sieges, not to conceal relics. The archives that survived the Order's destruction also reveal an organization concerned with logistics and faith rather than secrecy and mysticism. Surviving inventories list weapons, horses, agricultural products, and clothing, all meticulously recorded. Financial documents show transactions between Templar houses, local lords, and monarchs. These records demonstrate the Order's professionalism and transparency within its own system. They do not contain any indication of hidden doctrines or heretical beliefs. Modern scholarship has also re-examined the accusations that led to their downfall. The charges of heresy, idolatry, and moral corruption originated from confessions extracted under torture during the French Inquisition. When historians compare these forced statements with independent evidence, the inconsistencies are clear. In regions where torture was not used, such as in England, Germany, and the Iberian Peninsula, the Templars were generally acquitted of all charges. This contrast suggests that the French proceedings were politically motivated rather than based on genuine wrongdoing. The claim that the Templars worshipped an idol called Baphomet has been widely discredited. Linguistic studies indicate that Baphomet was a misunderstanding or deliberate distortion of Maphomet, reflecting Crusader-era prejudice against Islam. The Inquisitors likely used it to make the Templars appear guilty of foreign or heretical influence. No physical object matching these descriptions has ever been found in connection with the order. The idea of a lost Templar treasure is equally unsupported by evidence. Most of the order's wealth existed in land and debts, not in gold or jewels. When the French crown confiscated Templar property, it inherited numerous financial obligations rather than great riches. Detailed records of these transactions survive in royal and papal archives. They show that the Templars managed wealth, but did not hoard vast amounts of it. The myth of a missing treasure was born simply because the reality of ledgers and accounts was less exciting than the stories people wanted to believe. Another recurring legend concerns the Templars' supposed discovery of secret knowledge beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This theory appears only in later writings, centuries after the order's fall. There is no medieval reference to any excavation or hidden discovery. Archaeological surveys of the area have found nothing that can be directly linked to the Templars. Their headquarters in Jerusalem stood on the site believed to be the Temple of Solomon, but this was a symbolic association, not evidence of secret excavation. Historians also find no link between the Templars and Freemasonry. The earliest Masonic lodges appeared more than 400 years after the Templars were disbanded. The supposed connection was created by 18th century writers who admired the Templars and wished to claim their legacy. Freemasonry's symbols, compasses, squares, and the Temple of Solomon come from biblical and architectural traditions, not from the medieval order. The Templar imagery used by some Masonic groups is an homage, not a continuation. In recent decades, serious historical research has clarified many details of Templar life that once fueled speculation. For example, we now know much about their daily routines. The brothers prayed several times each day, maintained strict dietary rules, and lived in communities governed by clear hierarchies. Their discipline, combined with their military training, explains their effectiveness far better than any hidden force or secret knowledge. Archaeologists studying former Templar sites have found evidence of extensive trade and agricultural activity. The order's commanderies operated mills, farms, and vineyards. They introduced improved methods of crop management and livestock breeding. Their economic success was based on organization, not alchemy or mysticism. In addition to material evidence, documentary research provides insight into the Templars' worldview. Surviving letters and official correspondence show that their leaders were pragmatic and loyal to the papacy. They saw themselves as servants of God through action rather than contemplation. Their spirituality was rooted in duty and sacrifice, not in esoteric beliefs. The endurance of Templar myths can be explained by human psychology and cultural memory. When a powerful institution disappears suddenly, people seek reasons that feel equal to the magnitude of the event. Political betrayal and financial motives seem mundane compared to curses, treasure, and secret wisdom. Legends offered moral and emotional closure, where history offered none. The fascination with the Templars also reflects the modern desire for mystery in an increasingly rational world. They stand at the intersection of faith and doubt, history and imagination. Each generation has reinterpreted them according to its own needs, as symbols of spiritual purity, as victims of corruption, or as keepers of forbidden truths. In reality, the Templars were remarkable precisely because they were ordinary men who achieved extraordinary organization and influence. Their efficiency in managing property, money, and military operations made them indispensable to medieval society. When political power shifted, that same independence made them expendable. What remains today is a legacy of discipline, courage, and tragedy. Their fortresses still stand in parts of Europe and the Middle East, silent witnesses to an age of faith and war. Their records continue to be studied, offering new insights into the medieval world. And their story continues to remind us how easily truth can be transformed by myth. When the legends are stripped away, the facts reveal a picture of a devoted religious order that rose through service and fell through politics. They left behind no hidden treasure, no secret gospel, and no surviving brotherhood. What they left instead is a powerful example of how human imagination can shape history long after the facts are forgotten. The real mystery of the Knights Templar lies not in what they hid, but in how their memory survived, transformed, romanticized, and endlessly reinvented. Their story teaches that legends endure not because they are true, but because they speak to something timeless in human nature, the longing for meaning, secrecy, and the hope that some truths remain undiscovered. When the story of the Knights Templar finally fades into silence, what remains is not the record of a secret order, but the echo of an idea. Their castles have fallen into ruin, their documents are scattered across archives, and their name has been borrowed by countless legends. Yet more than 700 years after their destruction, the Templars continue to live in the imagination of people around the world. Their legacy begins with what they achieved in their own time. The Templars created one of the first truly international organizations in Western history. They built a network that connected the Christian kingdoms of Europe with the distant battlefields of the Holy Land. They developed systems of communication, finance, and administration that were centuries ahead of their age. In a world divided by feudal loyalties, they functioned as a single disciplined body governed by faith and rule. They also helped to shape the concept of the professional soldier. Before the Templars, warfare was often a matter of personal honor or feudal obligation. The idea of an organized permanent military order bound by vows and hierarchy was new. It combined the spiritual commitment of a monastery with the discipline of an army. This model influenced later organizations, including the Knights Hospitaller and the Teutonic Order, and through them much of European military tradition. Their financial innovations had an equally lasting impact. The Templars' system of deposits, transfers, and letters of credit laid the groundwork for modern banking. By offering safe and reliable financial services across great distances, they made travel and trade easier in a dangerous and fragmented world. In this sense, they helped to connect medieval Europe economically, just as they connected it spiritually. Their decline showed the other side of power. The same independence that made them valuable also made them vulnerable. When their military role disappeared and their wealth grew, they became targets of envy and suspicion. Their destruction demonstrated how political ambition could override justice, even under the authority of the Church. It was a warning about the fragility of institutions that rise above the control of kings and nations. After their fall, the Templars became symbols that changed with each era. In the centuries that followed, people projected onto them whatever ideals or fears their own time demanded. During the Enlightenment, they were portrayed as victims of superstition and tyranny, an example of reason destroyed by ignorance. During the Romantic period, they became tragic heroes, noble warriors betrayed by corrupt rulers. In modern fiction, they are often imagined as guardians of lost wisdom, custodians of sacred relics, or founders of secret societies. Each version reveals more about those who told the story than about the Templars themselves. The legends endure because they offer a mirror, in which each generation sees its own concerns reflected, the struggle between faith and power, loyalty and corruption, secrecy and truth. The historical reality is quieter but no less profound. The Templars were ordinary men shaped by extraordinary circumstances. They lived in a time when religion and war were inseparable, when loyalty to God and obedience to authority were considered the same duty. Their achievements came from discipline, cooperation, and belief in a common purpose. Their tragedy came from politics, ambition, and fear. The ruins of their commanderies still stand across Europe, in the stone walls of former Templar chapels, in the remains of their castles. One can still see the precision and restraint that defined their order. Their architecture reflects the same balance of simplicity and strength that characterized their lives. In these places, history feels close and tangible, a reminder that behind every legend, there are real people who once lived, worked, and prayed. The Templars' legacy also lives on in language and symbolism. The red cross on a white field remains one of the most recognizable emblems of the medieval world. The word Templar itself has come to represent devotion, discipline, and secrecy. Even those who know little about the order understand its association with courage and mystery. In Portugal, the continuation of their traditions through the Order of Christ carried their influence into the age of exploration. The same cross that once marked their banners appeared centuries later on the sails of ships that crossed the oceans. In that sense, their legacy extended far beyond the Crusades and helped shape the global world that followed. For historians, the Templars represent both a challenge and a lesson. Their story shows how power and faith can combine to create extraordinary achievements, and how easily those achievements can be undone when politics and fear take control. It also demonstrates how history can evolve into legend, and how legend can, in turn, reshape our understanding of the past. The fascination with the Templars will likely never disappear. Their mixture of piety, discipline, and mystery touches something universal in human nature. We are drawn to stories of secret orders and hidden truths because they remind us of the limits of our knowledge. In the Templars, people see the possibility that some parts of history remain just beyond our reach. Yet perhaps the real secret of the Templars is not what they hid, but what they revealed about human nature. Their rise shows the power of faith and organization. Their fall shows the danger of envy and political manipulation. Their memory shows the enduring need for meaning in a world that often forgets its past. More than 7 centuries have passed since Jacques de Molay stood before the flames in Paris. The world that condemned him is long gone, but his story endures. It has survived wars, revolutions, and the passing of empires. It survives because it speaks to something timeless, the search for truth, the cost of loyalty, and the mystery of what lies beyond recorded history. The Knights Templar began as protectors of pilgrims. They ended as symbols of betrayal and legend. Between those two moments lies one of the most remarkable journeys in human history. Their story reminds us that faith and power, truth and myth are never far apart, and perhaps that is why their name still echoes after so many centuries. Not because of the treasures they kept, but because of the questions they left behind.